Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees no new major releases, and we see officially the second weekend of Disney's Encanto, and boy oh boy, as I've been saying for a while now, it is not looking very good for this film, specifically in the domestic market, as it is expected to have a 49% drop, which in and of itself is not a terrible drop-off, though, of course, it does have to be taken into consideration with the Thanksgiving holiday that was last weekend in comparison to Ghostbusters Afterlife, which is having a 55% in its third week of release. But really, it comes down to just how much money it'll have by the end of the weekend and why, again, this film is in a lot of financial trouble. Before going any further, though, please make sure you smash that like button, line up that fire button, smash the rumble button. It really does mean a lot. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel with the bell notification turned on, that way you know every time a new video or live stream goes live on the channel. So Disney's Encanto is expected to come in at number one again this weekend with $39.9 million in the domestic market, with a 49% drop, bringing its entire total to $59.4 million. That is incredibly disappointing. By the fact that, one, it means this film's not going to reach $100 million by the third, maybe even fourth or fifth weekend, if ever. It still has a chance. I mean, obviously, it's still too early in its release to say that it's not going to reach $100 million, but to only be at around $60 million after their first 2 weeks, and seeing typical drop-offs by the end of the run, it would have to essentially overperform and have the most incredible legs in the world domestically in order for it to be able to reach $100 million really at this point in time. Because when you look at most films, typically they make somewhere between an additional 50% added on to their box office. That's like the best case scenario. So they double the number, right? So they double the number that they've made in their opening weekend, or you see them make very little. And so basically the first 2 weeks usually count for anywhere between 50 and 70% of their entire run. That's where I base all of my projections off on, is because when I was able to break things down historically, looking at the first 2 weeks in comparison to what the end result was, I saw that there was a range somewhere between 50% and 70% in most situations. Now, there's obviously exceptions to this. There's some films that, go closer to 40%, who do incredibly well, do even, more than twice as much by the end of its run after the first 2 weeks, which is, again, very incredible. And then you also have films that don't do as well, which get over 70%, which means that they barely make anything after their first 2 weeks of release. Still a little too early to tell exactly where Encanto will fall in the grand scheme of things, because even if it does have incredible legs, you're still talking about a movie that will probably cap out between 120 and 140 as far as what it makes in total in the domestic marketplace, and that is going to be one of the lowest from Disney this year. And if the film is not able to make mass amounts of money internationally, which right now it is just not showing signs of doing, then it is going to be yet another major financial loss for them, seeing that the film costs $120 to $150 million to make, and that's before marketing cost and before taking into account that the studio only gets about 60% of the end result number from the total box office. Ghostbusters Afterlife, again, looking a little bit stronger here with $11 million in its third week, with a 55% drop, crossing the $100 million mark, which has been a pretty good standard to be crossing during the pandemic times, but it is not a guarantee. Obviously, this film still needs to make a little bit more domestically and also needs to do a little bit more internationally in order for it to hit the break-even number. It looks like it might be about a week or two away from being able to do that. Of course, we'll continue to watch the drop-offs to see if there's any reason for them to be concerned about that. But because they've had some pretty strong drops, it had a very strong Thanksgiving showing as well. In fact, it almost even beat this new release from Disney. It almost beat Encanto and has a chance of even beating it technically this weekend as well, depending on how accurate these numbers and these projections end up being. But yeah, still a pretty amazing story nonetheless. However, I will say, again, for the sake of transparency, because as you all know, I am very clear on these numbers here. In comparison to Ghostbusters 2016, this film is very much still behind at this point in time. But this weekend could see it start to turn things around, but we'll have to, of course, wait and see the long term of that. It's really too early to tell whether this film will be able to surpass that of Ghostbusters 2016 or not. Obviously, as you all know, I'm a big fan of this iteration of the story. It is so much better than the atrocity that was Ghostbusters 2016. But again, again, we're still dealing with pandemic times, but also we're also dealing with a film that is very popular in comparison to 2016 Ghostbusters, which was not. So that is the reason why it is a comparable, or rather it is a valid comparison really at this point. House of Gucci is expected to make $7.5 million. So even though it's a pretty strong holdover from the week before, because this film cost as much as it did and because its opening was as small as it was, it is not looking good for that film either. Again, another Ridley Scott film looking to flop. And Eternals, again, not a bad drop, right? Not a bad hold, 48%. But because this film still needs to make well over like $150 million more in order for it to break even, it's looking like this is pretty much guaranteed to flop at this point in time. So going into some of the numbers here, as you can see, Encanto right now is at $70.5 million internationally. And that is the reason why this film has a reason to be in trouble, because basically it's going to barely cross $100 million worldwide this coming weekend. And it's not really being helped in some of the markets that it's in. Right now, the best market for it has been France. It hasn't really done much in Mexico or in Spain. Now, of course, these numbers are a little bit behind. They're not going to be updated with the day-to-day numbers, and so we'll find out exactly how well it's doing in countries like Mexico or Spain once the weekend ends. But it is still worth noting nonetheless that this is not doing as well as some of the other Disney Pixar films have done. Rather, in this case, it's a Disney film, but even just compared to other Disney films and other Pixar films, it is just not looking very good for this release. Now, a lot of people have been saying, well, it's pandemic times, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, yes, but again, there have been exceptions to that rule. There have been films that have broken even this year. There have been films that have even performed better in certain metrics than some other films in their franchises. Someone said, you can't keep mentioning Venom 2. You can't keep mentioning. Well, yes, I can, because it is an example of a film doing better than the original in its opening weekend. And I even admit saying, well, in the long run, it does fall behind, and we could definitely look at the pandemic for that kind of thing, but we do still have some metrics to be able to compare these things to as far as films doing better in certain ways. Also, No Time to Die did make $600+ million in the international market this year. So it is possible for films to be successful. It is possible for films to be able to overperform what their expectations were, and even comparison to some of the other films that have been related to them, or even some of the other films that have come out during this same pandemic period. What it shows us, though, is that audiences are being a lot more picky as far as what they want to go see. So yes, pandemic is obviously a part of the equation, but also what people want to go see is a part of the equation as well, meaning that the films that are being put out mostly by Disney and mostly by Warner Brothers as well. Warner Brothers obviously has the added caveat of the HBO Max day and date release model. But what that tells us is that when it comes to those films that are being put out by those major companies, a lot of people are choosing just not to go see it. That plus the fact that they cost a hell of a lot more than most of the other films that come out in any given year pretty much adds to guaranteed box office failure. And some people are saying, yeah, we'll just wait until Sony's Spider-Man film comes out. But as I just said, yeah, it's Sony's Spider-Man film that's coming out. They get about 25% of the revenue on that, which, yeah, if they make over $1 billion, which is likely, then you're looking at some profits there. But is it going to be enough to make up for the hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars that they've lost this year on their films? In the film market, no. Now, you could argue that maybe in merchandising or in other areas it can make it up, but just looking at pure box office, it's not even going to be close. And I'm sure to do an end of the year review of who are the biggest losers and who are the biggest winners as far as studios are concerned at the box office. Warner Brothers and Disney are the biggest losers at this point, and it looks like Sony is going to be one of the biggest winners, interestingly enough. Ghostbusters Afterlife is at $118 million worldwide at this point in time. But as I mentioned, even though it is expected to cross $100 million this weekend, it is also still just not doing very much internationally. It's never really been an international product. And this film, because of that, still has a little ways to go in order for it to be able to reach their break-even point. And it's going to rely heavily on the domestic market, but it's got to start doing a little bit more internationally too in order for it to push that number over the edge, because it's expected to do, again, relatively well for pandemic times for, this film and domestically, but again, the domestic number doesn't seem like at this point is going to be enough to push it over that edge. It's going to need a little help from the international box office, or at least a little bit more help in that way. Now, doing some comparisons, again, some people have been triggered over this comparison, but it is still valid because I think it just shows us just kind of the current state of not just the box office, but also of just general interest as well. So Again, Encanto and Coco, both films that were geared towards and targeted at the Hispanic audience. We see very different numbers here, right? We see that Encanto is about half of what the number of Coco was at the same point in history. Let me make sure that I put this even adjusted for inflation as well. Not that it'll change it that much, but I think it does put things into perspective. The number that kind of, I think, should be disturbing to a lot is this number right here, 989,000, less than $1 million on its first Wednesday. That is not the sign of a strong release. When in its first week of release, it is dropping below $1 million. It's one thing if this is like in the second or third week of release. Even then, there's still, I think, some reason to be concerned. When it's in the first week of release and you have a number, especially a Disney film, and you can blame pandemic all you want. The fact is that this is still a major release, had with a major company behind it. And even though a lot of people are saying, I don't remember any trailers for this film coming out. I do remember these trailers. They clearly did market the movie. It seems like they must have had some type of targeting marketing, and it's just not really panning out for them. As a lot of the films and a lot of the projects that they've tried this year haven't really panned out for them either. But this, I think, is a huge disappointment. And as it shows, this is tracking about almost exactly half, 50% or so behind where Coco was. And if that number continues to hold, we're looking at a film that's going to barely be over $100 million, which, again, as we've seen, the fact that it's not even going to get close to $100 million by the end of this weekend seems very likely that would be the case. It's not going to be saved internationally. And obviously someone would say, yeah, but it's pandemic time. Yeah, well, guess what? You see this number right here? Yeah, No Time to Die. It passed this number during pandemic times. And you can argue, oh, well, it's a different kind of movie and different audiences and people are scared. It's like, okay, yeah, you can mention those things, but at the end of the day, still have movies that are doing as well or better even during the midst of all of this. So again, it really comes down to, so what you're saying is that people are more willing to go out of their way to put themselves, quote, at risk for films like No Time to Die versus this. And again, you could say, well, that's adults and teenagers versus, people with families. It's like, okay, again, still same metrics, still same thing. You're dealing then in a situation where all the statistics show that it's, again, not nearly as dangerous for the kids as it is for the parents. So that still also doesn't quite hold up water unless people are just putting their heads in the sand and acting like the world is going to end, which some might be doing. But I think there's a little bit more going on here than what is being said out loud. I will also point out, though, that when we look to Ghostbusters 2016 versus Ghostbusters Afterlife, as I mentioned, this film is still falling behind it, right? And it has a same troubling number. Now, this is in its second week of release compared to where Encanto fell below this number in its first week of release, but it is still nonetheless pretty early on to be falling under $1 million, and that I think should be a bit concerning. We are about to enter the holiday season, so I think that they are expecting that this film is going to be able to continue to make money and bring in enough to push it over the edge. I do think that by the end of its third weekend, it will actually either match or get very close to or even pass up where Ghostbusters 2016 was at the same time of release, because of it adding a lot more in its second weekend compared to what this film did. But we'll have to, of course, wait and see the long term for that film. The other movie to talk about, of course, would be Eternals, which is right now at $353.9 million. And again, this film needs to make about $500 million to break even. And it's just not really looking like it's going to be in the cards for this movie, as this film has now been out long enough to where we can pretty much look at it and say, yeah, not likely going to reach the mark there. But anyway, what are y'all's thoughts about this movie? What are your thoughts about any of these films? Do you think Ghostbusters Afterlife is going to be able to have strong legs to be able to eventually at one point pass up where Ghostbusters 2016 ended up? It'll be an interesting battle to see. Obviously, it's going to require this film to do incredibly well, and also, of course, to rely on the huge drop-off that Ghostbusters 2016 did have because of bad word of mouth. But again, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's going to end up beating it. But also, what do you think about Encanto, right? A lot of people have been going after me, attacking me on my thoughts on Encanto, but I'm just looking at the numbers, and I'm just looking at what's being presented, and I'm looking at how much the film cost, and I'm just trying to use basic logic and reasoning here. Tell me where I'm wrong. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If this video, smash that like button, smash the rumble button, and light up the fire button. You're all amazing, beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my November Patreon, Subscribestar, and Locals members. Starting first off with Patreon, Andrew Hoyle, animation commentator, Brandon, Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Dolores Ed, Dion, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, Jacob the Juice, JC, Jeffrey Toon, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Gomer Kyle 79, Laura the Modern Major General Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Ullen, Stan Andrian, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, and Tina B., the Empress of the Universe. And a shout out to my Subscribestar members, UAB, Mad Dog, Storm Tracker, The R, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, Stan 4, John B., Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J, Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, and J Rod, the Beer Guru, and of course, ZK Man. Thank you very much for supporting me over there. And to my 3 supporters over on locals.com, Kara Tharp, Bifford a Hobbit, and Robert Barnes. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and every video I do on the channel, check out that top link in the description below to find out how to sign up to the various levels that exist, including the most basic level where you get a shout out, the secondary level, the Army of Asgard, where you get that, plus access to a giveaways exclusive server where I give away things like 4Ks and Blu-rays and digital codes. All kinds of stuff, a lot of fun. You then also have the Keeper of the Bifrost level where you get all that stuff, plus access to an exclusive podcast that I do with John the Flick Pick Flickinger. You get to ask us questions, and you get also access to that and the entire library of podcast episodes that we have done. And then there is, of course, the Chosen of Valhalla level, where not only do you get all of that, but also in your first month, you get a t-shirt of your choice and sent to you anywhere in the world. Of course, just let me know your size and the color option that you want. It'll be sent to you that first month. And also, you get to be featured on the once a month Chosen of Valhalla live stream, where we have a ton of fun talking about movies and projects and all kinds of stuff. Pretty much anything that the Chosen wants to talk about is on the table. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, check out that top link. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.